Hi, Michelle Florendo here, and welcome to Ask a Decision Engineer. Listen in and find out how to untangle big decisions with less stress and more clarity. Sometimes there are decisions that are so overwhelming and emotionally draining that what we decide to do to stay mentally and emotionally fit enough to make the decision is as important as the decision process itself. In today's episode, you'll hear from a guest client facing a difficult decision regarding care for her aging mother with a mental health condition. Listen in. All right. So why don't you go ahead and give me a recap of what's the decision problem that you want to tackle today?
Yeah, the decision problem or the issue at hand is I have a mom that's in her 70s who has fairly decent physical health, and her mental health is very unstable. And specifically, she has a diagnosis of being bipolar. And while that usually means two different extremes, mostly when she's in the worst throes of it, it's mania. And that means excitability. It's shown up in various ways like spending or willing dealing. But right now, it's gotten particularly acute and ugly where she is very aggressive. And she was with me in my home at the beginning of May for a couple weeks for a family event, a wedding. And it became intolerable.
I want to acknowledge how difficult, and especially emotionally difficult, this type of decision is. It involves the well-being of another person, a family member, and it's triggering all sorts of feelings for this guest client. In such an emotionally charged decision, a purely logical approach is ineffective. It's important to acknowledge the feelings involved and have compassion for what is being experienced.
The decision point, the thing that we need to do is figure out where can she safely live. And there's some constraints. Resources, money is a constraint. Location is a constraint. The ability to live with other people could be a constraint. And yet, social structures, when she's plugged into the right kind of social structure, along with proper medication, where we're wandering right now trying to find the right medication, and doctors that we both believe in and that she will listen to. Right now, she currently does not believe in her doctors, even though two of her three kids do. So the ultimate thing is, where can she safely live? And then how do we determine that, and how do we land her?
Okay. And tell me more about what are some of the things that you've done so far to try to work through this?
Yeah. So we have looked at what her income is. My brother and I put in on a condo a long time ago for her, and that's where she had been living on the East Coast. And we had done that to kind of minimize her expenses, but that's independent living.
Right.
So she has very small means. She's not Medicaid qualified yet, and different states have different qualifications. So, for instance, in North Carolina, she cannot have any money to be on Medicaid. I don't know what the situation is in New Mexico, which is where my sister is. And so exploring what assisted living might be is kind of what we have explored.
Okay. And tell me more about, as you've been working through this decision, what have been the stuck points or the hardest parts?
Personally, for me, it's in my mind and in my emotional state, it's almost so overwhelming to recognize and see that this is my mom. and feeling pretty limited in what decisions we can actually make for her.
Mm-hmm.
So you asked, what have we explored? So we have talked to a lot of counselors.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked to her psychologist. We've been with her psychiatric appointments. And then we've talked to our own counselors
Mm-hmm.
who are well versed in this disorder.
Yeah.
And one of our counselors is well versed in it, both professionally and personally, being a family member too. So it's really hard for me to stay involved and emotionally detached in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the hardest, because I'm getting exhausted, and our counselors has given me good advice, and I would say to the point of almost warning me that you got to be really careful. This is a marathon, not a sprint, and this kind of stress that you're under is chronic stress. So trying to figure out how to manage that. And then the next priority, assuming that number one is we're trying to keep her safe.
Mm-hmm.
And then from my perspective is, what is my professional life now? And what literally I'm going back. I was already going back to the drawing board and reinventing my business.
Mm-hmm.
And now thinking about, I glommed onto like an optimal situation, money wise, of, like the high end assisted living. And really it's probably not reality. So trying to get into a context that's more grounded in reality.
Mm.
I have ideas of like, if money wasn't an option, but the reality is it is. And even if it was an option, there's been a lot of choices made along the way that I'm not sure that would indeed be the best use of resources. And I feel like that sounds so harsh.
To recap, I heard her touch on a number of different objectives. Keep her mom safe, manage her own emotional well-being, navigate the next phase of her career, and make financial decisions that are grounded in reality and also support a range of needs, not just her mother's. There are also the feelings I hear, listening in between the lines, the overwhelm, stress, disappointment and sadness around constraints, and self-judgment around how she might manage trade-offs. There's friction in navigating where she actually has power to do something and where she doesn't.
Like, what I'm hearing is, and I think part of the reason why we're talking today is because all of the things that are happening and the decision that's in front of you is also very wrapped up in just the extremely emotionally hard place of seeing a parent who you love and wanting the best for them and coming up against constraints, as you had mentioned.
Yeah.
One of the first things that comes to mind is, have you heard of, I think it's Covey's circles of influence?
I think yes, but if we're talking about what I can control
Mm-hmm.
and under my influence,
Yep.
Yeah.
And then what is of concern. And so sometimes when I work with clients, part of what can be useful when sifting through all the things that are happening, that we're thinking about, that we're feeling, is getting those things out onto paper.
Mm-hmm.
And so, do you have a piece of paper with you?
Yeah, I got my iPad.
Okay. All right. So you already drawn them out. And so yes, the circles of influence exercise is exactly as you described. The smallest circle is, what is it that I can control? The next level is, what is it that I might be able to influence? And then the outermost circle is, what is it that I am concerned about, but that I cannot control and cannot influence? When it comes to the situation that you're in, go ahead and take a moment to write down the various things that have been taking up mind share and like heart share for you, and map them onto where they fall in the various circles?
I just walked this client through an exercise regarding Covey's circles of influence. And so if you were to look up this diagram on the internet, what you would find are 3 concentric circles. In the center is our circle of control. These are the things that we actually have agency over. We can make decisions around because they are within our control. This is often the best place to focus our efforts because it's through the circle of control that we can see results in response to our actions. The next circle out is our circle of influence. We don't have complete control over the things in this circle, but we can move the needle on what the outcome might be. The outermost circle, the circle of concern, are things that we worry about, but we don't have control or influence over. It's useful to map out where your thoughts and worries lie in these various circles because it then gives you a sense of what are the actions to take. The things that fall within your circle of control is where you should focus. That's probably where you want to focus most of your energy. Circle of influence, you may want to see how you might expand that circle. But then when it comes to the circle of concern, these are things where it's less about what is it that you can do and more about how is it that you can be with whatever comes within that circle.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of these. So I put where, when, safety, how much, and cooperation.
And where do those things fall?
So when I put outside my control.
And is that within influence or concern?
Concern. I think it's still there. I think the safety and the cooperation I think I can influence. And the cooperation I'm talking about is cooperation with my 2 siblings that don't talk to one another. And then depending on what the solution is, trying to get some other social capital to influence my mom. I think part of the other issue, the safety, I have it going across because I told my husband this morning that one thing that I have concerns about her safety is last night she was very vocal that if you guys try to do something with me, I'm going to run away. And so I said to my husband this morning, I think she could be a flight risk even when we find a place for her. And how much, I think also is a big question mark right now.
Right.
Yeah. And then even last night was the backup plan was if we couldn't get her settled down was to call the care unit to help. And after we did get her calmed down, my sister voiced concern that she wasn't even sure there were any beds available. So I think that that's a real constraint also, whether or not it's emergency services or just looking for a place. But I feel like that's something that could be worked. It's just, I don't know the answers at this moment.
Okay. So going back to the safety thing, it seems like even though safety is an overarching thing, there's specific aspects of it that are within each circle. And so what I'm hearing is what's in your circle of concern may be influence, but in the end, there's a certain level of your mother's actions that may be outside of your influence, like you can try to influence, but maybe outside of both influence and control. There are certain things you might be able to influence or even control in the decision of like how safe the place may be, or the people who would be providing services to her. But I just wanted to provide that specificity because in these situations where it feels like there's so much going on, and some of that emotional toll is from wanting to be able to influence and control the pieces that we can't. And so being able to articulate, okay, what are the pieces that are really outside of both versus the ones I can work on
Yeah.
are good, at least like lines to draw
Mm-hmm.
in the sand.
Yeah.
It's so important to be able to delineate what are the areas where you don't have as much control and where are the areas where you do, because that helps you understand where to focus your time and energy. In a previous podcast episode, I've talked about how decisions are about what we can control, not as much about what we can't. Where we are actually able to make decisions is where we have power. And in emotionally trying situations like this, where there's a lot going on and big things that may be outside of your control, being able to at least identify what you actually can control and influence can be a key source of comfort.
That totally makes sense.
And I think that's where it's useful, because if you know that something is outside of your control, outside of your influence, then you tap into the decisions around, well, how is it that I can support myself to be with this? Just like you did earlier in finding ways that you could tend to your own self-care so that you could have the capacity to unpack the decisions that fall within your control.
Yep.
One of the things that I've heard you talk about a number of times is the constraints piece.
Yeah.
And your desire to look at solutions that are still grounded in reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that can be really challenging is when we're trying to, and this happens in the options space, because like from what I'm hearing about the situation, when I think about the three different components of any decision, the objectives, like what is it that we want in the outcome, the options, what are the various alternatives we can choose among, and then the information. It seems to me that the biggest stuck point or the difficulty is with the exploration of options piece. Does that sound right? Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's clear what you want out of this situation. So one of the things that can be challenging when we're in the options piece, especially when we're thinking about constraints, is we can feel stuck when we are both trying to explore, so doing divergent thinking, while at the same time being in convergent thinking space. So it's kind of like trying to explore options, but at the same time shutting them down for what won't work. I'm curious, what would it look like to even just do a 1-minute brainstorm of what are the possible different options that exist, where the only constraint is when I'm hearing the money piece, because you said you have these ideas of if money were no option. But before we do a brainstorm, why don't you list what are some of the other constraints that have been coming up separate from the money piece?
Who's making the decisions?
Okay.
And geographies.
Okay.
And I think in the last 18 hours, I think some geographies have come off the table. So I think I'm answering the correct question. You were asking what kind of constraints were we thinking? Right. Yeah. Yeah. So when I told you I was imagining things that were probably beyond resources, I was thinking about the North Carolina options to keep her plugged into a social system that she knows, but there's no family to support her nearby. And I think what we experienced last night was a proof point that we need to have a closer, willing option with a family member. So I think we're in a different. The game board looks different today now.
Oh, okay.
From a geography. Yeah.
And then what are the other considerations when it comes to this overarching decision of where?
The decisions are what's the field of possibility, and then with that field of possibility, boiling it down to figure out what we could work with and try to get it into like 2 options, so that then we can lay out the options for her.
Yeah.
Because right now she keeps asserting rights that don't really exist. And yet if she's not bought in, that creates the flight risk even, whereas if we can say, look, given what we have to work with, this or this, to try and give her some form of agency, I think is super necessary.
Okay. And so going back to the field of possibility piece, what might it be like just to do a brainstorm of what is in that field of possibility? And again, just being fully committing to the divergent thinking and suspending the convergent.
Yep.
Is it easier to talk them through or write?
I think talk them through, actually.
Okay.
I think, from a geography standpoint, probably the broadest geography would be the Southwest. And so the Southwest, I mean, New Mexico, Arizona, or Texas.
Okay.
The understanding of who cares for people that have my mom's health challenges. So I don't know who those are. I know my sister knows better than I do because of her professional background.
Okay.
So right now it's knowing stuff is out there, but not knowing any specifics around it.
Okay.
So like we don't have a list, and it was, I have been waiting for the conversation to come up so that we could have it and try to sort through what the preferences and what the thoughts are of my two siblings. And last night was a push point that pushed my sister and I into the conversation. So in some ways, there's knowable stuff that we don't have listed, because before the population set was so vast, it was kind of hard to figure out what to do.
Sometimes constraints can be helpful. This is super interesting. For much of this conversation, my sense was that constraints felt like a real obstacle to this client. But here, I'm learning that at least in one way, it's the opposite. Because there were so many options, too many to begin researching, it was too overwhelming to take action. However, now that she has some geographical constraints to narrow down the field of options, it's easier for her to take action and begin researching this smaller set. This points to a key reality when it comes to dealing with options. You may actually cycle through divergent phases of generating options and convergent phases of narrowing options, and that's fine. Just remember to approach the phases in sequence, because trying to do them simultaneously will only get you stuck.
Right. Okay.
So I think that is a pretty tangible next step. And then a lot of the uncertainty is tied to those next steps, because we don't know what the availability is, what the cost is.
Okay. So it sounds like because of this new constraint around geography that has been introduced just recently, it makes it easier to tackle what is the next step around even getting the information that you need to explore the options that exist. Okay.
Yep. And I think the other thing is that the recognition of where my mom's state of her competency level is diminished in such a way that things that used to be on the table are now off the table because they're not viable.
Right. Okay. So that sounds like something that sometimes when I'm working with clients, there's the emotional space that's taken up from the sense of loss from options that existed but no longer exist. Yeah.
In an odd way, the last 24 hours, that's what feels the best, is that I think we're hitting reality. I think in some ways, earlier I said we're free falling. I think we're free falling because we don't know if there's going to be any more episodes before we find the steps to solution. And yet on the other hand, it seems like there is more clarity because we're getting in a tighter option space.
Right. And so going back to this circle of control, it seems like you have a next step in terms of an action item that you can tackle so that you can start just wrapping your head and your arms around, like, what are the options that exist? what else falls within that scope of control? And I'll put a boundary on it. What falls within that scope of control for this week?
And base level communication between the siblings.
Okay.
And possibly trying to go ahead and let some people beyond the family know about what's happening, and that we'll need their influence.
Mm.
And I'm stuck. The responsibility of bridging a lot of the communications falls on me because of fractured relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it exhausting work. And I also need to do some important client work this week.
Yeah.
So I need to get myself over that obstacle, because it's not helping. And I know that intellectually, but I cannot. I am frustrated and mad and resentful about being in this position.
Yeah.
Feelings as an obstacle. This is real. Intellectually, she knows that she needs to get over this obstacle, as she calls it, her feelings about the situation. Feelings of frustration, feeling mad and resentful. The thing to know about feelings, though, is that when ignored, they don't just go away. Sometimes the quickest way to get over feelings is not to avoid them, but to move through them. How might you acknowledge and observe the emotions that arise? And what do they tell you about what you need?
So, and it's not really anybody's fault, but it is hard.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, it's hard. It's hard, especially when sometimes the path forward that we see requires us to do things and let things go that we hadn't planned, or to make difficult decisions around what is it that I am going to give of myself to this.
Yeah.
And where is my own boundary around what I need to be able to make it through this marathon.
Yeah. And I'm pretty good at this stuff, but not like this is a test.
Mm-hmm. And so what are the things that you're going to put on your action list that are for you to support your own energy levels?
I'm gonna try to be with people I trust as much as possible. I host a writers group once a week. And this morning was a little, I didn't feel like myself. And yet at the same time, being with other people, it was so ironic. I ended up I give a warm-up prompt to do a 2-minute writing. And then it ended up, I could turn the prompt and bring people back and say, you know, it was about what inspires and motivates you to be the best you, and do your best, you do work you love. And I could tell them, you do that for me. But even like right now, I would like to be composed. And this thing has pushed me to lose my composure, even with my mom, even face to face. And I don't like, you know.
Yeah.
And I also don't like the feeling. And I think, you know, with most illnesses, when you're helping a patient, most times, ironically, not with COVID, but, you know, my mom had a breast cancer journey last fall. There's not a fear that you're going to get breast cancer when you're helping a breast cancer patient. COVID, that's a different thing. So the thing with mental illness, it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
It almost feels like you can get sucked in. And it's very wearing emotionally.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to answer your question. And I think what I was doing was cataloging, what is it going to take? It's going to take exercise, eating right. My husband is a really great partner. it also, as the world's starting to open up, travel is going to start happening. And I've decided not to travel with him next week. And things like that, just filling that void when he's not here, I didn't even think about, but that's part of like the ladder of things I need to put together.
Yeah. And it's that scaffolding. And I think it's when we lose sight of our need for that scaffolding to be able to have the capacity to deal with difficult decisions that we get burnt out or we get sucked in.
Yeah.
And so how might you keep the things that you need? How might you ensure that that's as top of mind as the other things?
I think I just need to have like a daily plan of who is in the circle of what's going on. Having this conversation, I'm pretty good at being able to share, especially these kinds of things, because I think mental health is a big issue that needs to be discussed more.
Mm-hmm.
And something that contradicts that is I also feel pretty good at being a fairly self-sufficient person.
Mm-hmm.
And you're really making me realize that I need to have an intentional game plan, and I don't with who to talk to. You know, I have a counselor I can talk to, and that's got to be part of the game plan. But I just need some close friends to just know that I may need to call them.
Yeah,
it's this. I won't wish this on anybody.
Yeah. So for this week, when you think about the action items you can take to support your ability to tackle the overarching decision problem, what are the things that you would outline for yourself?
Nutrition and exercise, and having a list of go-to people and letting them know what's happening so that it's not a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's an opportunity here too. I have two sons and they're both adults, and one lives in the area and the other one is going to be visiting for a wedding reception this weekend. So I think there's an ironic opportunity there is to go spend some time with them and not on this topic. Because I think we've spent an inordinate amount of time on this topic.
Yeah.
And I think we need to have just like connection time.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would want to share with those who are listening to this?
Yeah. Mental health issues are real, and there's a large degree of variations of how they show up. Everything from getting the blues to having, real depression, and there are a lot of resources, and we need to get better at talking to one another about things. Mm-hmm. My family's going through a lot with my mom's bipolar right now. We've lost a family member to suicide. And if anybody is concerned about things, there's resources like NAMI in the US and AMI, but don't be afraid to ask people what's going on, and don't be afraid that you're going to push somebody into a dark place. If anything, you might help them stay out of a really dark place.
Thank you for being willing to share.
Yeah.
There are a number of things to take away from this decision coaching conversation. When dealing with decisions that involve other people, it is useful to identify, of the things that you care about, what is actually within your sphere of control? What is within your sphere of influence? And what is left to fall into the sphere of concern? The spheres of control and influence is where you should focus your actions, whereas the sphere of concern is less about decisions and more about accepting what you can neither control nor influence. Another thing to remember is how to engage with the options component of decision making. When considering options, there are two different phases. The divergent phase, where you explore and generate as many options as possible, and the convergent phase, where you narrow down your options. This guest client was done with the divergent phase and was ready to focus only on options that fit within certain constraints. Once she realized that new constraints allowed her to narrow the option set to a manageable size, it became mentally easier for her to plan the action steps she needed to take to begin researching those options. Lastly, understand that in order to make good decisions, we need to resource ourselves so that we can be mentally fit enough to tackle the decisions at hand. The guest client could feel how this emotionally charged decision was wearing her down. So a critical part of her action plan included steps that she would need to take to tend to her own mental health. As she said, mental health issues are real, and we need to get better at talking about them. If you don't already have people you can talk to about mental illness, you can visit NAMI.org, for information and referrals. And if you or someone you care for are having suicidal thoughts, you can get urgent support at the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. The more we talk about how mental health should receive the same level of care and concern as physical health, the more we can normalize that mental health is health, period. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you heard something today that you found helpful, please share this episode or write a review. Also, if you're interested in more resources on how to make decisions with less stress and more clarity, go to askadecisionengineer.com to sign up for the mailing list. I'll be teaching a class on decision analysis and emotional awareness in a few months, and my email list subscribers will be some of the first people who get updates on that. Again, this is Michelle Florendo from Ask a Decision Engineer. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.